So, there's just this. There's just this. This is all there is. Whatever's happening, whatever is arising. What is this? It's everything arising from nothing. It's the relative arising from the absolute. It's noise arising from silence. This voice is silent speaking. It's movement arising from stillness. This hand is stillness moving. There's only emptiness. There's only nothing. There's only stillness. There's only silence. There's only the absolute, out of which movement and noise and activity and phenomena and this arises. And they are not different. They are the same thing. This is the relative, and that is not different to the absolute. This is the absolute expressing itself as the relative. That's kind of important, because we don't need to seek the absolute in some other special place. We can't possibly find the absolute in some other special place because there is no other place. This is it. This is all there is. There's no possibility of finding the absolute in some other place, in some other time. In some other place maybe called a temple in the Himalayas, in some other time called the future. There's no possibility of that because there is no other place, there is no other time. This is it. This is the absolute. If the absolute is to be seen, it can only be seen in this. I mean, another way of saying this, if we feel, and we may well feel, this word, the absolute, it has so many ideas and philosophical notions attached to it. We might feel it's very special. But if the absolute is to be seen, it can only be seen in the ordinary, in the everyday, because the everyday is all there is. There is absolutely no possibility of seeing the absolute in the future. Not because the absolute is such a difficult thing to see, but because there is no future to see it in. Has there ever been one moment of the future? Who in this room has ever experienced one moment of the future? Or some other place than this? Who in this room has ever experienced some other place than this? Even on your most wild, ecstatic, out of your head drug trip, if you have taken such a thing, and I am not suggesting anyone in this room has, but even if, hypothetically, even on your wildest drug trip, you haven't experienced any other place than this, any other time than this. So if the absolute is to be seen, it can only be seen in the ordinary. It can only be seen in what's happening, because what's happening is the absolute. Seamless oneness. Seamless oneness. But of course, in seamless oneness, as we know, often a dream of separation arises. Often a dream arises, a very convincing dream, which goes, this is not seamless oneness. This is not seamless at all, and it's not oneness at all. This is duality. What creates that sense of duality? What creates that sense of duality is that separation of the person. That separation out of oneness, so that now there is two-ness. Or there's at least the very powerful and very convincing experience of two-ness. For most of us when we're very young, that happens. That contraction into the sense that there is an I, and this I is separate. So now there's two things. We don't need to worry about the fact that actually, once we've gone into duality, there are many things. There are carpets and chairs and people and trees. The essential shift out of oneness into duality is the shift into feeling that we are separate, that we're contracted. And for most of us this occurs when we're very young. For most of us this occurs as we become self-conscious at a very young age. And so now there is separation in its simplest and most obvious sense. Sometimes people say, well, what does that mean, a sense of separation? What does that mean? The simplest thing imaginable. There's me and there's everything else. So that's the two-ness. One of the two-nesses is me, and the other of the two-nesses is everything else. So now there's a sense, instead of oneness and wonder, there's a sense that I exist separate from everything else, and I move around in this other thing called the external world. So now there's me and my internal world, and I move around now in this other thing, the external world, which doesn't belong to me, and in which I might not even feel very at home. In fact, I probably won't feel very at home in it. So now there's the sense that there is something to be done, there's something to be negotiated with. There's something to be negotiated with called stuff out there. And the stuff out there includes stuff that's reasonably easy to negotiate with, like tables and chairs. And it also includes stuff that's really, really difficult to deal with at times. And of course that stuff is called other people. So there's not just the sense that there's a person here, there's a sense that there's lots of other persons out there, and oh boy, are they difficult to negotiate with sometimes. So suddenly life has become a task. I mean, life's pretty simple as a 6-month-old baby living in a state of oneness. Life is pretty simple. But as separation happens, life becomes a task, and it can become almightily difficult. Because now there's all this other stuff to negotiate with, including other people. That means I've now got to learn a lot of stuff. I've got to learn a lot of stuff. I've got to learn a lot of rules, a lot of principles about how do I negotiate with these other people so that I don't upset them too much and they don't upset me too much. Because the more we upset each other, the more tortured life becomes. So I've got to learn all these rules and principles as to how to do that. How can I get through my day meeting other people like you guys and not upsetting you so much that my life becomes intolerable and your life becomes intolerable? It's really difficult. But fortunately, help is at hand. Fortunately, help is just around the corner at the end of the cot, or in the schoolroom, or in the kitchen. Because there are big people called parents, teachers, uncles, big sisters, big brothers, who are all too eager to teach me how to negotiate this very, very difficult thing called my life, because now I have a life. Once there was just life. At 6 months old, there's just life. Now there's this thing called my life. Now I have a life. This precious possession that I now own and that I have to look after and have to somehow make work, have to somehow make into a success. But don't worry, let's not get into too much of a frenzy, because there's plenty of bigger people around to teach me how to make that life work. And what the rules are and what the laws are and what's going to get me into big trouble with other people, so I'd better avoid it, like, for example, telling the truth, whatever that is. Telling people how it really is for me, however that is. There's plenty of people there to teach me how to dissemble and pretend. And what belief systems will best make life work. So now I have a life, I have a past, I have a future, I have rules, I have laws, I have principles, I have meaning, probably. Some of these big people around me will tell me what the meaning of my life is. Depending on who the big people are, the meaning of my life might be to praise God, or it might be to recycle my empty wine bottles. It might be to create a Marxist paradise, or it might be to save the planet. Doesn't matter, really. So I have a past, I have a future, I have ownership of so much stuff. We could say that I am born into oneness and without possessions. How could I have possessions in oneness? There's nothing to possess. There's nothing that isn't me after all. And there's nothing that I am not. So there can't be any possessions. But then as separation occurs, now, wonder of wonders, now I can own possessions. So a life is a possession. Meaning is a possession. Duty is a possession. Morality is a possession. Vice and virtue are both possessions. Rules for living, every rule for living is a possession. And we could see every single one of these possessions as like an anchor that's attached around my ankle by a chain. No wonder I begin to feel tired by the time I'm old enough to go to school. As I go through life, more and more anchors might be attached to my ankle by a chain. I start to get very tired indeed as I drag these ankles through life with me. And as the Buddhists are very good at pointing out, some of these chains and anchors may be made of iron, even very old, rusting, nasty iron, with quite sharp bits on them that I can cut my fingers on. And some of them may be made of gold, and gold's lovely. Oh, we all love gold. Some of them may be made of gold. But if it's a 2-kilogram chain, it doesn't make any difference whether it's made of gold or iron. It's just as tiring to drag around with me. So if in, I suppose, what we might call conventional terms, if my life goes badly, then probably all or most of those chains are made of iron. And if my life goes well, in England, in English, we have this phrase, born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Do you have that in Germany? Yeah. Born with a silver spoon in your mouth. So if we're born with a silver spoon in our mouth, or maybe a gold one, or perhaps a gold one encrusted with diamonds. If the chains attached around our ankles are golden with diamonds encrusted all over them, they're still chains. They're still heavy to drag around. That's living in separation. It's living with this thing called a life, the ultimate possession. We may have a Ferrari, a yacht and a house in the Bahamas, but the ultimate possession is I have a life. I have this thing called a life. It's my life. I'm responsible for it. I can make choices about it. I can make decisions about it. I have this wonderful thing called free will. Maybe we might talk about free will a bit more later on in the afternoon if we want. It's a fascinating one, that one is. We have this wonderful thing called free will. We have all these philosophies and religions and spiritual stories, almost all of which depend on this wonderful thing called free will. It's like free will is right at the base of all of these wonderful religions and philosophies and spiritual stories. You take that brick away from the base, everything just collapses. All of those stories just collapse. Perhaps most of all, I have responsibility. With choice comes responsibility. With free will comes responsibility. With decision-making comes responsibility. That's maybe the most tiring thing of all in my life. All right, maybe I go out clubbing 3 times a week till 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's pretty tiring, but it's not as tiring as responsibility. By the way, that was a metaphor. I don't actually do that. Responsibility. Maybe responsibility is the heaviest chain of all as I'm dragging around with me. Maybe life just goes on like that, maybe, and then I die. But maybe at some point the thought in some way arises, I don't like this, I don't feel comfortable with this, something's not right with this. Even with the yacht, the Ferrari and the house in the Bahamas, it's still not right. And so I start looking for what is wrong and how to put it right. And depending on my personality, the influences around me, the life I'm living, I might look in different directions. Drugs, psychotherapy, religion, spiritual paths, philosophy, political action, who knows? It's all the same. In a sense, it's all the same. In a sense, it's all the search for the solution to the problem. What is the problem? The problem is me. The problem, we could call it the problem of me, the problem of being a person. If I'm spiritually inclined, I might go off to the Himalayas with a guru. If I'm psychotherapeutically inclined, I might do 5 years of psychoanalysis. And much of this may help. Much of it may help. Much of it may help me feel easier. Much of it may help me feel more comfortable. There may be several people in this room, and they certainly include me. You know, I would say, I have received much benefit, let's say, from psychotherapy. I have done psychotherapy. As a result of that, I have ended up feeling much more comfortable in my skin. But listen to the language I'm using. I have ended up feeling much more comfortable in my skin. This stuff I own, this skin that I own, and this person that inhabits it. I mean, the clue is in the phrase, if you like. So we may do our spiritual searching, we may do our psychotherapy, we may forgive our mother and embrace the guru and be embraced by the guru, and much of this can be really helpful, and none of it ultimately really hits the spot. So there's a lot more comfort in my skin, perhaps, and there's still separation, there's still that feeling of contraction, there's still that feeling that this isn't quite it. I started this talk, I start many of my talks in the same way. You might accuse me of having a very unoriginal mind, I don't know. I often start talks by saying this is it. And the sense of separation, the sense of uneasiness in this skin, the sense of uneasiness in a person can be summed up as this isn't it. This isn't it. Even after the psychotherapy, the hugs from the guru, the psychological understanding, the reading of philosophy, even after all of that has been gone through, there can still be that sense, there probably still will be that sense. And it still isn't it. Maybe it's almost it. Maybe I'm so much more comfortable in my skin than I was 40 years ago. So this is almost it, but it's still not quite it. There's still that little something missing, which keeps me searching and searching and searching. So my life is fueled by this searching. There's just that little something missing. Now, if what we're talking about this afternoon, what we're here to talk about this afternoon is seen, if non-duality is seen, if oneness is seen, if awakening happens, if liberation happens, all of these words are completely ridiculous and totally inadequate, but they're the only words we have in a way. If oneness is seen, if there's even a split second of awakening, and it very often is just a split second, then what's realised is the problem is, it's not that there's still something missing. It's not that. No wonder the search for the something that's missing could never succeed. It could never ever succeed. Because it's not that there's something... The problem isn't that there's something missing. The problem is that there's something present. It's not that I need to find something. I have to lose something. So of course every mantra I added to my collection of spiritual techniques, of course every psychological theory or psychotherapeutic practice that I added to my toolkit of ways I help myself to get through my day, can't ultimately be the solution. Because I'm looking for the thing that's missing. Maybe that last mantra, maybe that last psychotherapeutic technique, maybe that last philosophical idea, maybe that last experience up a mountain in the Himalayas. I'm looking for that last thing that's missing. And the problem is entirely different to that. The problem's the opposite of that. It's not that there's something missing, it's that there's something present. It's not that I need to find something to add to what I've already got. I need to lose something that I've had ever since separation took place when I was a young child. And what I need to lose, of course, is myself, the ultimate possession. The ultimate possession is me. It's so close to me that I don't even realise I have it. Separation is so familiar to me that I don't even realise it's there. Constriction and contraction and dissatisfaction are so much a part of my life that I don't even notice them until they're gone, until they're gone, until they're gone. And then I notice the absence of me. Maybe just a split second, perhaps just a split second of awakening, but it's incontrovertible. So anything can happen, but there are tendencies, and one of those tendencies is that if there is a split second, just even a split second of awakening, one of the tendencies that can be experienced as a tremendous shock, as a huge shock. What the hell? What was that? It's going to be what was that, because of course during that split second of awakening there's no one there to ask the question. So there may be a split second of awakening and then the person's back. The person's back just as solid as before, but now perhaps in a state of shock and very shaken up and going, what the hell was that? And then everything starts to collapse. Because one of those bricks, I talked about free will, the idea of free will as being, one of the cornerstones of so many of our beliefs and philosophies and attitudes to life. And that just taken for granted, I exist as a person, so taken for granted, that's another one of those absolutely basic blocks. Just a split second of that being removed. Oh boy, nothing is ever the same again. What the hell was that? Emptiness. Everything's empty. This is empty. That's empty. What's going on? And then the one that comes back. There are no rules about this, but I'm just kind of painting a scenario that's quite likely to happen. I'm trying to describe what quite often happens. It doesn't have to be like this. And the one that comes back after that split second of awakening, it's like everything starts to collapse. The cornerstone's been taken away and everything starts to collapse. What starts to collapse? Well, all the stories, all the beliefs, all the assumptions, all the attitudes just start to collapse. They become unsustainable. Sometimes after a split second of awakening, there's no rules, absolutely no rules, but sometimes, often enough to make it worth commenting on, what is left after a split second of awakening may be a person in a very great state of confusion. What's that confusion about? What the confusion is about is seeing that none of the stories that ruled my life up to then, none of those stories have any purchase. None of them can be true. None of them can be real. They're just stories. Why? Why is that? I mean, stories are so different. I mean, if you think of the story of ushering in the glorious Marxist revolution, it's so different to the story of, Hanuman the monkey god, or the story of the Catholic Church or whatever. It's so different. How can all these very, very different stories all collapse at the same time after just a split second of seeing emptiness? Seeing emptiness there and emptiness here, and seeing that there is no here and there, because if this is empty and that is empty, there's no this and that. There's just emptiness. How can all these completely different and often very contradictory stories, how can they all collapse just with a split second of seeing emptiness? Because it's seen that they're all based on, they're all predicated on the existence of a person. So if the person's seen through, all the stories are seen through. Every story of meaning, every story of path that leads somewhere, every story that suggests it is possible to lead from here to somewhere else which is better, whether it's a Marxist paradise or whether it's paradise in the arms of the sweet Lord Jesus, makes no difference. Every story that suggests that it's possible to move from a place called here, which is inferior, to a place called there, which is superior, collapses when it's seen that they are all predicated, they are all based on the belief, the assumption, the impression, the feeling that there is a person here who can move through something called time from somewhere worse to somewhere better. They all collapse in the same way, just with a split second of seeing. We could say if emptiness is seen, emptiness is absolute. If emptiness is seen, then the emptiness of all the stories are seen. And all the stories are seen as offering empty promises. The promise that I, as a separate being, can get from somewhere called here, which isn't so good, to somewhere over there, which is better, whether it's the Marxist paradise, the Christian heaven, or perhaps cavorting forever with Ganesh the elephant god, and the gopis, depending on my belief systems and culture. It just all collapses. So I think that's quite a long talk, isn't it? I think I'll just add one last thing and then stop and see what happens then. So I've talked a lot about emptiness, because in a way this is about seeing emptiness, but it's also about seeing fullness. Again, there's no rules, there's absolutely no rules. It doesn't have to be like this, but this is reported on often enough to make it worth commenting on. That seeing of emptiness, which can occur suddenly, it doesn't have to occur suddenly, but it can occur suddenly. It tends to bring an end to a great deal. It tends to bring to an end, as I've been talking about, to a belief in all the stories. But it doesn't bring an end to the person. Because in that split second of the seeing of emptiness, the person's gone, and then the person tends to come back. What seems to bring, I'm picking my words very carefully, what seems to bring about the end of verse, because everything we're talking about here is a seeming. I mean, in a way, we're only talking about a dream here. We're not talking about anything real. I mean, I apologise if you think I've been sitting here for the last 40 minutes talking about something real. I haven't been. I've been sitting here talking about a dream. I've been talking about the dream of separation. I've been talking about the appearance of separation. So nothing I've been talking about is real in that sense. Or we could say it's real in one sense and it's unreal in another sense. But in the spirit of what I've been saying, the end to the dream of separation, which was never real in any case, but the end to the dream of separation doesn't tend to happen when emptiness is seen, when it's seen that this is emptiness and that is emptiness, so there is no this and that. What seems to bring about the final end to the person, the final end of separation, the final end of living in separation with all its implications, is the seeing not just that this is empty, but that it's also full. And sometimes that seeing can happen at the same time in the story of a person's life, in the story of time, and sometimes it can happen at different times, in the story of time, in the appearance, in the dream of time. But it's the seeing that this is not just empty. The seeing that this is empty destroys everything I believed about myself as a person. But it doesn't bring a final end to searching. What seems to bring the final end to searching is the seeing that this is not just empty, it is also full. The problem with that is it has to sound like a paradox. I can't help that. It's just the nature of language. The mind is quite likely to ask, well, how can there be both emptiness and fullness? How can it be both empty and full? And all I can say to that is that's as close in language as we can get to describing this. And we can't get very close at all in language because language is determinedly dualistic and we're trying to describe the non-dual. So that's the closest I can get in language. It doesn't work, it's hopeless, it doesn't really get close at all, but there's nothing in language that will get closer to it. But what we're talking about here, what brings about the final end of separation, is not the seeing that this is empty and that is empty, so there is no this and that. It's the seeing that this is empty, that is empty, there is no this and that, and this is also full. And there might be all sorts of questions that the mind that does not actually exist, but that the mind might come up with about that statement. And one of the most obvious questions is, well, this is full, what's it full of? And again, words can't get near it, they absolutely cannot touch it. There is no way of words approaching this. But as we have to use words, I use the phrase unconditional love. Many other speakers use the phrase unconditional love. Many other writers use the phrase unconditional love. It's a lousy phrase. It's a terrible phrase. It doesn't begin to get what we're talking about, but at least it has one and only one good quality to it. It's a better phrase than any other. You know that saying, I think, wasn't it Churchill that talking about democracy, saying democracy is the worst possible system of government apart from all the others. Well, it's like that with this phrase, unconditional love. It's the worst possible phrase we could use to describe what we're talking about here, apart from all the others, which are even worse. So I'm going to stick with unconditional love. And if we want to talk about what that means more, we can do. I'll leave that up to you. If we want to, we will. But I think that's long enough for an introductory talk, so I'm going to finish there, and we'll see what happens.
Richard just said, even after a split second of insight into the emptiness, confusion might occur. But what is the reason for this confusion? I mean, the insight happens, and the emptiness of whatever it is has been understood and seen, and still a confusion arises. Where does this confusion come from? How can one deal with this confusion? Or what is the way of this confusion?
I know this is a very dangerous thing for me to say because you're filming this, so what I said is on record, but I'm not sure I used the word confusion. I think what I remember saying is the person who's come back after that split second of seeing might be going, what the hell was that? So we could, confusion if you like, lack of wow, is that what reality's really like? For 47 years I believed reality was totally different, and now but it's gone. Now I'm back and everything's solid again. If we want to use the word confusion, then I'd relate it to two things, maybe, one of which I've already talked about, which is that sudden seeing that all those stories I had in my head, all those beliefs, all those opinions about how things are, they're completely worthless. Well, that's likely to leave me in quite a state of confusion, if you like. Quite a, what's going on? So maybe we could use the word confusion in that way. The other thing I'll add now, which I don't think I mentioned before, I say in a way, it's maybe a way in which the one who has come back might not feel themselves to be confused and yet still is. Very often what happens, not necessarily like this, but very often what happens, that seeing, it might not sound very attractive, seeing emptiness. But in a way, it can be incredibly attractive for the one who is suffering, for the suffering person, because it's a glimpse of the possibility of that end to suffering. Because if there's no one to suffer. And so in that way it can seem extremely attractive. The confusion that can arise in a different way to what I've just been talking about is the one that's come back can feel, well, that's it. That was a complete seeing, but it was just a glimpse of a complete seeing. Everything is empty. As the Buddhists say, this is just empty phenomena rolling by. Emptiness, 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 emptiness. And it can seem incredibly attractive. The one who's come back can feel, okay, that is the final seeing. That's the secret, if you like. That's the secret of life. The secret is that there is no one, there is nothing, there is only emptiness. Now I'm back, I desperately want to get back there. I want more of it. Oh, it's so lovely. It's more powerful than any drug I could possibly imagine or have ever experienced. But there's no way of getting back there. How can I get back there? I don't exist. All of those spiritual paths are empty. All of those religious beliefs are empty. All of those philosophies were empty. And so the one who comes back can be left in this very, very difficult place. Sometimes it's called the desert. Sometimes it's called the dark night of the soul. People often report a period of feeling despair. What is that despair about? What's the dark night of the soul about? It's like that. There's been this glimpse of the absolute reality, and it was just a glimpse, and now it's been snatched away, And now what it's left is a conviction. There is nothing I can do to get back to it, but there's a kind of desperation to get back to it. So that, I mean, I hope it may sound quite clear why that might involve a lot of confusion. But there's one last piece of confusion in there that I haven't commented on yet. The one who comes back maybe, only maybe, but they may be convinced, okay, that's the ultimate. The ultimate has been seen. Not I have seen the ultimate, but there was a split second when I wasn't there and the ultimate has been seen. It may well only be when there is the final collapse in which emptiness and fullness is seen, in which it's realised that that initial seeing wasn't complete, because it was only seeing the emptiness. Oh, this is the absolute nature of reality. Reality is empty. This is empty, that is empty, reality is empty. It might not sound very juicy or exciting or attractive, to the personal mind, but believe me, to the one who has been suffering through 45 years of a neurotic life, it's unbelievably attractive and ends to any possibility of personal suffering without drugs. Oh, how wonderful. So it may well seem attractive, however little it may sound attractive to the personal mind, but it's only in that final seeing that it's realised that that was also incomplete. It was an incomplete seeing, because this isn't just empty. It's not just empty. However lovely emptiness is to the neurotic, suffering person, it's also full. And that can't be seen till it's seen. I know that sounds tautological, and I'm sorry, but it can't be seen till it's seen. And when it's seen, it's incontrovertible. Yes, this is empty, utterly empty, completely devoid of substance and full. There's nothing and there's everything, and they're not different. There's emptiness, and emptiness is full of unconditional love, and this may sound like a hopeless contradiction, and it isn't. But the only way to really know that it isn't a hopeless contradiction is when it's seen. Not when you see it, because you will never see it, but when it's seen. When you are there, this is not seen. When this is seen, you are not there. It is your very existence as a separated person that prevents this being seen. Now that's a kind of a dangerous thing to say philosophically, because of course the mind, the monkey mind, will now get hold of that statement and it will say, okay, what I need to do is somehow destroy myself so that this can be seen. But I can't destroy myself because I'm an illusion. How can an illusion destroy an illusion? As is often said again in the Buddhist tradition and probably the Taoist tradition and probably other traditions as well, the eye, the physical eye, the envisioning eye cannot see itself. So just as the eye can, I'm going to make a terrible pun here now, I can't resist it. Just as the eye, the ocular eye, cannot see itself, so the eye, the ego eye, cannot remove itself. The ego eye is an illusion. An illusion cannot remove itself. An illusion cannot do anything. This may be a terrible metaphor, I don't know, but it might be a bit like watching a character in a movie. I don't know why, whenever I mention a movie, I have a kind of fairly limited imagination. My mind always goes to Humphrey Bogart and Casablanca. I don't know, I get fed up with referring to Casablanca, but some strange thing comes over me and my mind blocks out the knowledge of any other film. So, let's take Rick in Casablanca. He's a character, two-dimensional character on the screen. We might say, I don't know. Surely, in sixth scene when Ingrid Bergman, it is Ingrid Bergman, isn't it, comes into his bar. Surely he could have behaved differently. I mean, if only he'd said that instead of that. And that would have been such a much better thing to say, and then Ingrid Bergman would have reacted differently. And then they'd have got back together right then and there, and it could have ended happily. It would have been a much shorter film, of course, but it would have been ended happily. Why didn't Rick in Casablanca, scene 7, say that instead of that? It's absurd, isn't it? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, you can hear how ridiculous it is. Why is it ridiculous? Because we know that Rick isn't a real person. He's a character on a screen. He's just doing his Rick stuff the way it's been scripted. It's ridiculous. Well, it's just a metaphor, but maybe it's not a completely hopeless metaphor. Why, after all these efforts and philosophy and studying and guruing and psychotherapying and all the wisdom I've accumulated and all the great books I've read, and I've studied A Course in Miracles for 150 years, and endless, why cannot I remove the I? It's the same question, really. It is the same question. Why can't Rick make a better decision in scene 7 of Casablanca? Why can't Hamlet kill that bloody king? But whatever it is, Act 2, scene 7, the king's at his prayers. Hamlet's got his sword out. I hope you all know Hamlet. Hamlet's got his sword out. He's about to plunge it into this skunk's neck, and he stops. Oh, if I kill the king now, he's at his prayers, he might go to heaven. That's no revenge, is it? I want him to go to hell. Oh, I will not. So we have to sit through 3.5 more miserable acts. End up with a stage piled up in corpses, and who is it? Fortinbras taking over the Crown of Denmark. What an awful ending. All of that could only be avoided if only Hamlet would show a little bit more sense in Act 2, Scene 3 or whatever. But we know that's ridiculous. It's absurd, isn't it? Of course Rick can't make a different decision and say something different to, I can't remember her name in the film, to Ingrid. Of course he can't. He's just a character. It's just... Well, it's the same reason that we cannot remove ourselves. We're a character. One phrase somebody has used for this is the cosmic puppet. We're the cosmic puppet. It's not a very good analogy, that. It's not a very good phrase. I don't use it very often because the phrase cosmic puppet suggests that there's a puppeteer, and then off we go scampering along after another story. Of course there's no puppeteer. But we can no more destroy our I than Hamlet can kill the king in Act 2. Don't you just want to reach onto the stage and strangle King Lear in Act 1 when he divides his kingdom into 3 and then gives it all to the 2 villainesses and banishes his lovely virtuous daughter? Don't you just want to leap onto the stage and slap him round his stupid face? He changes his mind, comes to a different decision. Well, I do when I see King Lear. But it's ridiculous, isn't it? Because King Lear is a character doing his King Lear dance. That's what we are. We are a character. I am a character doing my Richard dance.
So it means whatever I do in life is the only thing I can do. There is no choice. There is no alternative to whatever I do.
Absolutely. Of course, it's far worse than that. You have never done anything in life. Much, much worse than what you just said. There is no you. You do not have a life. Life simply unfolds. But in essence, the answer to your question in the spirit you ask it, of course, is absolutely, absolutely the case.
So whatever happens,
Nothing could be any different to how it is. I mean, isn't that just the most obvious thing anyone could say? Nothing could be different to how it is. So, back to you.
whatever happens is supposed to happen, or whatever.
Okay, so I wouldn't use that phrase. I would say the much more banal and actually perhaps annoyingly tautological sentence, whatever happens, happens. The reason I wouldn't say what you just said is because for me that begins to introduce yet another story. Whatever happens is supposed to happen. It's intended to happen. And it's very difficult to say that without a meaning story. Oh, it was supposed to happen, was it? Oh, something's planned this. Someone's planned this. Maybe my higher self planned it. Maybe God planned it. Maybe destiny planned it. So I'd avoid that language for that reason. It's so easy for a story to creep in. We so much want a story. It's very easy. No, it wasn't supposed to happen, but it happened. Wasn't supposed to, wasn't not supposed to, and it happened. This is what's happening. And what's happening is always what's happening, and that is the most stunningly obvious thing anyone could say.
And it could not happen in a different way, because it didn't happen in a different way.
How could it happen in a different way? How could this be different to what it is? But again, the mind might like to make a story of this. It couldn't happen in any other way, therefore it was meant to happen like this. That's not what I'm saying. You know, this goes beyond all of those stories. Those are all stories that, in a sense, they're all stories. They're all sort of drug. They're kind of mild drug to. I mean, some people take Prozac. Some people take, diazepam. Some people take Valium, often to calm their neuroses. And we could say these stories are they're like a sort of drug in a way. It's a different kind of drug designed to calm our neuroses. If there's maybe the more neurotic we are, the more we might be attracted to stories like that. Kind of makes us feel less anxious. Well, if it's meant to be, I don't know, perhaps my anxiety levels might subside. If God's looking after everything, perhaps my anxiety levels might subside. So the kind of drugs, in a way, in stories. But everything is what it is. There was I read an article about a year ago, some journalist had bothered somehow to research what are the most hated phrases in the English language, what people most hate having said to them. And the top phrase, which I can well understand this one, the most hated phrase was "you wouldn't understand." You can understand, you can sort of get why people hate that. You wouldn't understand. I mean, it's incredibly patronising and da-da-da. But the second most hated phrase really surprised me, because the second most hated phrase after "you wouldn't understand" is "it is what it is." And I love that. I love it. And obviously, if people hate it, they're hearing it in a different way. But it is what it is. It is. This is what it is. It's so simple. This is what it is. This is never different to what it is. It's remarkably consistent, this is. It's never different to what it is. And in a sense, that's just a slight statement of the blindingly obvious. In another sense, there's something about that I really like. If you were here on Friday evening or yesterday, I don't know about yesterday, but I know on Friday evening, I think on Friday evening I was talking quite a lot about relaxation. You know, maybe we can just get a little bit of the flavour that if this body-mind system can really get that this is what it is. It's never different to what it is. It never can be different to what it is. If this can really get that, then there might be a bit of relaxation. Because so much stress is created by trying to make this something other than what it is. So even just getting that, even just getting this is what it is, might produce a bit of relaxation. And what is relaxation? Some of us who were here on Friday night and yesterday should know the answer to this question now. What is relaxation? Relaxation is the key to Buddhahood right here, right now.
Could you say again what the Buddha says is right?
Relaxation,
Yeah.
this is a quote from an English Buddhist called Keith Dowman. Relaxation is the key to Buddhahood right here, right now.
Okay.
So anything that leads to some relaxation, bring it on. There's a couple of lines in William Blake, aren't there, about this? I'm now going to misquote them because I can't remember them, but it's something like curse braces, bless relaxes. Curse braces, so anything which creates tension, curse it, but bless anything that creates relaxation. Oh, and by the way, that thing, relaxation is the key to Buddhahood right here, right now. That word Buddhahood, my God, that's grandiose, isn't it? So that might set some more stories running as well. Buddhahood, my goodness, that's something to aim for. No. Buddhahood, seeing this.
Motherhood.
That's it.
Motherhood.
Motherhood will do. Yeah. Who's the Buddha? You're the Buddha. I'm the Buddha. What other Buddha could there be?
So, if someone maybe could think that it couldn't be different than it is in the moment, I had just the idea that it's only possible to see it like that afterwards in time. If it's just not happened now, if it hasn't happened now, there are a million choices possible. So that it couldn't be different, one could say only afterwards.
So I'd say we're talking about two different things then. So I would say, the kind of habit of mind or the cast of mind that looks back on the apparent past in the dream of time, the apparent past, and says, well, it couldn't have happened any other way. That can be kind of quite a useful analgesic for the mind, or tranquilizer, non-chemical tranquilizer for neurosis, anxiety, guilt, particularly guilt and nostalgia. Because of course for the person who lives in time gets to experience many, many very juicy feelings. And particularly in terms of the past, the feelings of guilt and nostalgia and regret. So the person who looks back on the apparent past and says, well, it couldn't have been any different, that's possibly quite a healthy non-prescription drug to reduce the sense of guilt, regret and nostalgia. It's great, it's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, it's absolutely great. Probably better than taking, diazepam or Prozac. But it's not in the same ballpark as simply that relaxing into this. And part of that relaxing into this is just the recognition that this is what it is, always, in the story of time, irrefutably. This is always what it is. And of course that contains within it, of course it can't be any different. Of course it can't be any different. Of course it can't be. How can there be one less molecule of water in this glass than there is? Never mind more important things like how could I have married Mary rather than Elizabeth? Or how could I have bought a pink shirt rather than a blue shirt, if we're talking about really important things? Never mind really important things like that. How could there be one less molecule in this glass of water than there is? I mean, that's not a deeply philosophical question. That is the statement of what we call in English the bleeding obvious. I wonder what that meant.
I cannot add anything there.
How can there be one fewer molecule of water in this glass than there is in this? Oh look, now there are fewer molecules of water in this glass, but it's still this.
I can't see any molecule.
Neither can I. For that we'd probably have to take some LSD or psilocybin or something like that. Then we'd be able to see the molecules, maybe the particles themselves. And it would still be this. It would still be this. So we might see the particles moving in the walls, the energy moving in the walls. Well, it would still be this. So what? Still be this. There's only one seeing that matters, and that's seeing that there is no one who sees. There's only seeing.
I'm just thinking to this Hamlet and Casablanca idea. If I go to the cinema and watch the movie, it's already directed.
Yes.
So referring to our life means this, in a certain way, is already directed, and I can relax and just.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. So, that was a metaphor. All metaphors eventually break down if you push them far enough. This particular metaphor breaks down almost immediately, and that's where it breaks down. And that's why it's a good metaphor in some ways. It's a very really bad metaphor in another way. But it's a kind of the obvious association to make. If we use the metaphor of a film, a play, something like that, somebody has written the play, somebody has written the film, somebody is directing the play, somebody is directing the film. So it's very easy from that metaphor that I acknowledge I have introduced myself. It can be really misleading because the next step is, of course, may be to think. So that is also part of the metaphor. This is a play, this is a film, somebody has written it. Some force is directing it. No. That's where the metaphor breaks down. That's why it's dangerous to use. That's why I quite like the phrase cosmic puppet in some ways, but in other ways it can immediately be very misleading. But again, it's not just how language works, it's how the mind using language works. It's very difficult to think of a metaphor that doesn't have that implication because we're so used to thinking of it. We're so used to thinking in terms of cause and effect. And if we're kind of spiritually minded, philosophically minded, metaphysically minded, religiously minded, seekingly minded, we're likely to think in terms of ultimate cause and effect. In other words, that there is something or someone ultimately running the show, whether it's God or Great Spirit, or cosmic Buddha land or whatever. That's the direction the mind is likely to take us in. No, there's nothing running the show. And again, I suppose the pun that it's possible to detect in that is kind of half deliberate. There's nothing running the show, no. And there's nothing running the show. Ultimately, what's running the show is nothing. But it's not running the show in that there isn't a plan. How could there be a plan? Because a plan can only unfold in time. There's no time. And if that's a puzzle, I'll make this the last point because we're coming up to the tea break. We can take it up afterwards if we like. If that's a puzzle, for those of you who were here on Friday evening or yesterday, if that's a puzzle, well, if it's a puzzle, but it might become less puzzling if we just think, again, metaphorically or as an analogy about a nighttime dream. And if somebody sitting here with a memory of this talk starting, with a memory of setting out at 1 o'clock this afternoon from a house in Berlin to come here, with the expectation of going out to supper tonight in a restaurant or whatever. So, well, of course there's time. Obviously there's time. How can you deny there's time? Maybe the simplest thing to say is to refer us to a nighttime dream. Everyone has nighttime dreams. Almost everybody remembers at least some nighttime dreams. Well, in a nighttime dream there's time, isn't there? And yet there isn't. So in a nighttime dream there is the appearance of time. In a nighttime dream, we might leave the house, walk down to the station, buy a train ticket, get on the train in Berlin. Not this last week because there's been a strike. So a dream 2 weeks ago, get on a train in Berlin, go on a journey to Munich. It's a dream, so perhaps it'll get a bit surreal. At some point, the ticket inspector comes round with a peak cap on, and the ticket inspector is a crocodile. And instead of clipping our ticket, because it's a dream and it's surreal, instead of clipping our ticket, the crocodile offers us a live salmon. Something like that. And then a nun gets onto the train and sits down and starts talking to us and then turns into a bat and flies out of the window because it's a dream. And all of this clearly and obviously can only take place over time. I've just narrated a series of events which can only unfold over time. And in space, this train is moving from Berlin to Munich. So time and space exist in this nighttime dream. And the moment we wake up in the morning, bang, we know none of that happened. And yes, it did happen. And yes, it didn't happen. So what can we say about all of those events in the nighttime dream and the time and space in the nighttime dream? Well, it was both real and unreal. In a kind of way, it was real. We have a memory of the crocodile ticket inspector coming round. So in a way it was real, but of course it's unreal. So it's both. It was a real nighttime dream and it was unreal. This is the real daytime dream. And it's unreal. And there are a few, but only a few, significant differences between the nighttime dream and the daytime dream. One is the daytime dream is more consistent, and the other is, unless we've been taking LSD, the daytime dream is generally less surreal. Once the daytime dream becomes as surreal as the nighttime dream, we're likely to attract the attention of a psychiatrist.
Yes.
But those are the chief differences, aren't they? Nighttime dreams are less consistent and more surreal. And it's coffee time.